Trump really wants it. Zelensky would be happy to do it. It's Putin who has resisted it regularly and said it's impossible because, Zelensky, in his view, is illegitimate president of an artificial country. But I think if Trump pushes Putin hard enough, then, it is possible. I don't rule it out at all.
Now, let's focus on the big news of the day. Ukraine's President Zelensky has accused Russia of demonstrative and cynical military strikes as he arrives in Washington to meet Donald Trump. The US president is, of course, pushing ahead with his plan to attempt to end the war in Ukraine. He's reportedly backing the idea that Zelensky could end the fighting by handing over land and cities in the east. European leaders, including Keir Starmer and Emmanuel Macron, are going to join the meetings in the next couple of hours, as you know. The former British ambassador to Ukraine, Lee Turner, told Times Radio Breakfast earlier that there are two main objectives for the European leaders to attempt to communicate to Donald Trump.
The first would be the importance of the principle that international borders must not be changed by force. This is a blindingly obvious bedrock of all of our security arrangements, to which President Trump inexplicably seems to pay no attention. And then the other thing that they'll be wanting to talk about is security guarantees.
That's Lee Turner, who used to be the British ambassador to Ukraine. Now, in a moment, I'll talk to the former Russian Foreign Minister, Andrei Kozyrev. First, let's get the latest from Steven Erlanger, who's New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent. Stephen, we'll never forget what happened in the Oval Office back in February. It won't be like that again today, will it, when President Zelensky meets Donald Trump?
I shouldn't think so, partly because I think Zelensky's learned his lesson. Gideon Rachman described it properly. You just flatter Trump and don't fight with Trump, certainly not when the cameras are on. That's the biggest mistake. And Zelensky has a point. He's had more of a relationship with Trump before. He's meeting him alone without the Europeans. I presume Trump will have other people with him too first. So that's the danger zone. I think when the European leaders arrive for chat and lunch, we'll have a better idea. But this idea that they would somehow protect Zelensky from Trump isn't really going to work. But the point is really that Putin very cleverly put the onus back on Zelensky, somehow convincing Trump that Zelensky was the problem to get to a peace treaty in a war Russia started. And part of what the Europeans are going to want to do is to reverse that onus of responsibility and make Trump realize it's Putin that wants to continue the war, and that Trump's first instinct was correct, which was you should have a ceasefire and then talk about land swaps and exchanges, and not make those contingent on an end of the war, which means the war might never end.
Why is it that Donald Trump doesn't get that Zelensky really, it's very difficult to ask a man who didn't start a war to end it? Why does Trump stubbornly refuse to acknowledge this?
Well, he's bought, in a way, the Russian narrative. I mean, he believes that with the Maidan and pushing for NATO enlargement, Ukraine somehow frightened Russia into starting this war. I mean, he believes that had Ukraine just kind of settled down into neutrality, maybe none of this would have been necessary. But after the Maidan in 2014 and the Russian annexation of Crimea, that was going to be impossible. I think Trump also sees Ukraine, much as Russia does, as something a little artificial, part of the Russian world somehow, the Russian civilizational world. And he's always had trouble with Zelensky ever since Trump's first term, when Trump had to undergo an impeachment process. So I think he thinks Ukraine's in the way of his great, beautiful friendship with Putin and all the deals he can do with Russia. Trump is a real estate guy. He seems to think this is just a real estate deal and doesn't understand all that is involved in pushing a peace treaty down the throat of anybody.
And ultimately, he wants to prize Russia away from China, doesn't he? Or at least attempt to.
Well, that's their excuse. I mean, sure. But I mean, I think that's really secondary. I think he believes that, there are three big powers in the world, China, Russia, and the US. And he wants decent relationships with both of them. I don't think people keep talking about the way Nixon and Kissinger worked on China. That was a long time ago. China is pretty invested in Russia not losing this war, and Russia is quite invested in its partnership with China. So if that's their notion, I think it's just not going to work.
What do you think are the chances of a meeting after today with Putin, Zelensky, and Trump all together?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, Trump really wants it. Zelensky would be happy to do it. It's Putin who has resisted it regularly and said it's impossible because, Zelensky, in his view, is illegitimate president of an artificial country. But I think if Trump pushes Putin hard enough, then, it is possible. I don't rule it out at all.
And something I was discussing earlier with my colleague John Pienaar, that image of Donald Trump bursting into spontaneous applause on the red carpet in Alaska on Friday. What do you make of that?
Well, Trump has always liked Putin. Putin is very good at being liked. If you remember, George W. Bush said he looked into his soul and, liked him. Putin is very well trained at giving people a notion of warmth and of a relationship. I mean, that's what he does. He's also very good at finding people's weaknesses and vulnerabilities. He's a trained agent that way. So I do think Trump likes the strongman idea. He feels Putin is a good leader who's restored a lot of credibility to his own country, who doesn't have to worry about meddlesome judges and politics.
And voters, yeah.
And voters,
yeah.
That's right.
Thank you very much for your time, Steven Erlanger, who is New York Times chief diplomatic correspondent. It looks as though Keir Starmer has arrived in Washington ahead of those talks. He's just one of the European leaders who's going to be in and around the Oval Office a little bit later. We'll have all the coverage for you here on Times Radio. Let's have a word with Andrei Kozyrev, who was Russian foreign minister between 1990 and 1996. Mr. Kozyrev, what do you think is likely to be the mood in that initial meeting between Zelensky and Trump today?
Very good. I'm sure it's not a red carpet, but pretty good mood. Yes, mood. Okay.
The mood will be all right. Okay, so it won't be anything like what unfolded back in February.
No, I don't think so. Nobody needs that. And Zelensky has a new jacket, so I mean, images would be okay.
Yeah, actually, it's quite interesting that you mention his clothing. It will be quite interesting to see what Zelensky is wearing in way of a jacket today. We'll keep an eye on that. So what do you make of Donald Trump's diplomatic efforts? Because he has many critics in this country, but we probably all should acknowledge that he is apparently determined to stop the fighting and the loss of life in that war between Russia and Ukraine. And he deserves credit for that, doesn't he?
Yes, of course, it looks that way. The problem is that for a long time, before President Trump came into the office for this time, for second term, in Washington, the upper hand, I think, had a appeasement party. Those who thought somehow they decided that Ukraine should concede territories to Russia because Russia is, I think this is the main reason, because Russia is a nuclear superpower, which it is like America. But that's completely wrong. Putin wants to be a conqueror of Ukraine and of many other countries in Europe, which was signaled by, I don't know, it was probably a hint just by Lavrov, the foreign minister, who came to Alaska in a sweater or whatever it is, with USSR.
Yeah.
That is, he had big Cyrillics, but that was the USSR. So probably he wanted even to warn Americans, and knowing that it would be showed all over the world, warned that it's not just an ambition of Putin to take a piece of Ukraine or and stop somewhere there or the whole Ukraine. His ambition is recreate more or less the Soviet Union. So next probably will be the Baltic states, which were also, like Ukraine, inside the Soviet Union, were considered integral parts of the Soviet Union, and they are now in NATO. So if NATO and the West cannot give Ukraine weapons to repel the aggression, not only to tolerate seizure of their territories, but to repel the aggression, then Putin will have clear signal that he can go to Baltic states. And assurances, yes, it's in the center of discussion now, but assurances or guarantees, it's very difficult to think of guarantees against aggression, military aggression, brutal aggression.
Well, we're hearing today that our British Prime Minister says, there is a real possibility of British forces on the ground in Ukraine. Do you believe that?
I would believe that if more British weapons, especially long-range missiles and other powerful weapons, which UK, of course, has, if those were now on the ground in Ukraine, helping Ukraine to push back. But since they are not there now, I mean, it's very difficult to imagine. And also, let us not forget that Putin is in power for 25 years, while European leaders and the American presidents change every now and then. So what kind of guarantees? The only guarantees which would matter would be ratified guarantees. And imagine a discussion in the House about that.
Put simply then, you believe that President Putin understands only one thing, really, and that is force, and the West actually is simply unwilling to use it.
No, yes, but not only willing, but uses it. Yeah. That's the problem.
So talking is one thing, but doing appears to be something else.
Absolutely.